Try picturing a Yakuza member in your head. What do you see? An expensive suit, full body tattoos, maybe a pair of sunglasses to top things off. One detail in particular, though, is not only an immediate identifier of a Japanese gang member, it also gives them quite a story to tell in most cases. I am, of course, talking about their missing pinky fingers, which are the result of a little ritual known as Yubitsume, or finger shortening. This strange ritual that Japanese gangsters seem to admire so much has become well known to anyone who is even remotely interested in the dealings of Japan's criminal underworld. So why do the Yakuza, who really need all their fingers to count all that money they're making, decide to cut them off occasionally? In today's video, we will explore why it is done, how it is done, and when it all started. All of which I will hopefully be able to do without grossing you out too much. This is the history of Yubitsume, the Yakuza's finger-cutting ritual. In order to find the origins of Yubitsume, we have to go back in time so far that the Yakuza themselves weren't really a thing yet. While ritualistic finger cutting in Japan could go back much further, its origins are suspected to come from the early Edo period, the 17th century to be exact. In 1687, Japanese poet Saikaku Ihara released his story Budo Denraiki, which contains a male character who accuses his wife of cheating on him. As proof of her loyalty to him, he has the woman sever her own fingers, saying, "If you do not have a secret husband, you must let go of the 5 fingers by yourself in the oath of all deities." While the Edo period is known to be a time where art, poetry, and literature were allowed to flourish, it was also a time of pleasure for the land of the rising sun. Even here in the X-rated parts of 17th century Japan, we can find an early version of what would become to be known as Yubitsume. Prostitutes of the Yoshiwara red light district in Edo, now Tokyo, were known to occasionally sever their pinky fingers, which they would then give to their favorite customer, symbolizing commitment and loyalty to the man. In some cases, this was done with fake fingers made from rice flour or by sending the pinky of an already deceased person instead, in order to make customers feel special without actually having to sacrifice a finger. While reading about finger cutting in Edo's red light district, I stumbled upon this funny but also kind of tragic story about a prostitute who lost her severed finger due to a pinky's tendency to fly off when performing Yubitsume carelessly. It was a summer day and all the doors and windows of her second-floor apartment were open. The severed finger flew off into the garden below. She lost consciousness with pain, but since she had not prepared a means to staunch the bleeding with a hemostatic, a painkiller, or a doctor, her attendants were at a loss. Her clothes were drenched with blood in no time. In the meantime, no amount of searching in the garden by her attendants uncovered the treasure intended for her patron. Worse still, when she explained the incident to her patron, he accused her of having given the finger to someone else. Kizan reports that the unfortunate woman had to part with yet another finger to satisfy her patron. The mid-18th century then saw the birth of the so-called Bakuto groups, or groups of gamblers, who are largely considered to be a precursor of today's Yakuza. Yubitsume as we now know it starts with these exact gambling groups, who used the severing of fingers as punishment for gang members who committed crimes that did not warrant expulsion or even worse, execution. A member severing his own finger had more than one benefit to the boss of a Bakuto group. Not only did the fear of Yubitsume itself prevent many members from making mistakes, their adeptness in battle would also be significantly reduced. Japanese sword fighting styles conventionally utilize a grip that relies heavily on the strength of the pinky finger when holding a sword. Not only was cutting off a finger a painful punishment that kept lower ranked members in line, but gang members who did lose a finger would then be even more reliant on the protection of their boss than ever before. That's what you call killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Those Yakuza bosses were always just as smart as they were evil. Fingers were not only taken from the Bakuto gang's own members, but their customers as well. If a gambler was not able to pay off his debt, a finger was often demanded as an alternative form of payment. Just like its gang members, customers of the Bakuto were motivated to pay their debts in order to avoid the painful Yubitsume procedure. In essence, Yubitsume was a highly effective way for the Yakuza's precursors to keep both their members and their customers in check. By the late 20th century, over 2 centuries after the Bakuto started collecting fingertips like trading cards, Yubitsume was still widely used by the Japanese criminal underworld as a form of punishment and apology. A government survey from 1993 claimed that 45% of Yakuza members at the time had performed Yubitsume. 15% did it at least twice. By then, the reasons for cutting off a finger among Yakuza were still largely the same as they were during the Bakuto era. However, apologizing to your boss for a mistake that you made was now not the only reason for performing Yubitsume. Basically, the modern finger cutting ritual can be separated into 2 different types, called Shiniyubi and Ikiyubi. Gangsters who perform Shiniyubi or dead finger do so in order to repent for a mistake that they made, similar to the Bakuto mentioned before. Sometimes this happens without the orders of a gang boss, with the lower class gangsters choosing to cut off their finger voluntarily in order to avoid a potential much harsher punishment by their superior. The motivation behind Ikiyubi, or living finger, is a different one. In this case, the person cutting off a finger is not personally responsible for an offense. Instead, avoiding conflict because of something that someone else did is the goal here. A high-profile case of Ikiyubi took place in the late 1960s, when a Yakuza boss by the name of Machi Hisayuki was involved in a heated conflict with the Yamaguchi-gumi, Japan's most powerful gang. Driven by revenge, one of Machi's underlings shot an associate of the Yamaguchi-gumi in an assassination attempt that was not signed off by his boss. While the victim of the attack survived and received 2 million yen in cash as an apology, the boss of the affected rival gang, Taoka Kazuo, received the fingertip of the assailant's boss. Machi, at this point, only wanted to avoid a gang war at all costs. His finger symbolized a serious apology to his rival Yakuza boss and may or may not have avoided a lot of unnecessary bloodshed. Both types of Yubitsume, Shiniyubi and Ikiyubi, follow pretty much the same ritual, which can however vary in some details. In order to perform Yubitsume, one places the left hand on a chopping block, with the palm facing downwards. Sometimes the finger is made numb with the help of cold water or by wrapping a cloth tightly around it. To actually cut the finger, any sharp knife is fine. However, a tanto, which is a short dagger also used by the samurai, is usually the preferred piece of equipment for this ritual. How much of the finger is actually cut off depends on the severity of the offense, with fairly minor offenses usually taking off only the tip of the little finger, above the upper joint. Multiple offenses, on the other hand, no pun intended, can cost a Yakuza member much more than that, with the ring finger next in line on the cutting board. An attempt is made to stop before cutting off 3 fingers of the dominant hand, in order to still be able to use things like chopsticks and pencils. Paying for a mistake? That's totally fine, but not being able to eat ramen anymore? Not cool, man. After the finger or a part of the finger was cut off, it is then usually wrapped into a white silk cloth and handed over to the recipient of the apology. In some cases, different methods of handing over and preserving severed fingers are used. The book Yakuza, Japan's Criminal Underworld contains a testimony by a Yakuza boss who stated that they instead took the finger, put it into a small bottle with alcohol, and wrote the offender's name on it before sending it to the offended party. While swords and knives were the most popular choice for performing Yubitsume for a long time, hammers and chisels eventually became a popular tool as well. Either way, the ritual obviously comes with a few risks and problems attached to it. Because the procedure is done by the offenders themselves instead of a medical professional, cutting the finger at a bad spot and losing huge amounts of blood is not a rare occurrence. If the wound is not properly sterilized and dressed, infections can often occur as well. Overall, not the safest method of saying I'm sorry that I've ever heard of. Yubitsume is indeed still around these days, but has become more and more uncommon since the Japanese government put the so-called Crime Countermeasures Act into place in 1991. This anti-Yakuza act contained countless laws which were supposed to weaken the Yakuza's grip on Japanese society, while also putting an end to the violence which had reached a boiling point just a few years earlier. The actual effectiveness of these laws was often put into question, with critics calling the laws too soft to actually bring significant change. While the supposed decline of the Yakuza themselves over the past 30 years is difficult to gauge, Yubitsume has undoubtedly decreased in popularity, quite a bit. Whether or not this was achieved by the ban on Yubitsume, which is indeed included in these laws, is unclear. These days, with Yakuza groups having to be at least a bit more low-key about their existence, Yubitsume is simply not seen as an attractive option in order to pay for your mistakes by the younger generation of gangsters. For ex-Yakuza members or those who simply want to conceal their involvement with the gangs, prostheses have become all the rage over the past few years. $2,700 will buy you an artificial wax finger that will be made to look as realistic as possible. Apparently, they will even add hair taken from your other fingers onto it, if that's what it takes to make it look convincing. In most cases though, such a fancy wax finger will not even be necessary. Yakuza bosses generally accept money as an apology nowadays. With the decline of the economy as a whole, as well as the supposed sharp decline of Yakuza groups themselves, they can definitely use the additional monetary resources acquired by accepting cash as an apology. That way, everyone is happy. The young Yakuza who don't care much about gang traditions get to keep pinky fingers on their hands that are not made of wax, while their bosses receive more cash to spend on all their shady endeavors. Are there any other Yakuza rituals or rumors that you would like me to cover? Feel free to share your ideas in the comments. My sources, for those who are interested, are contained in the description box. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Either way, thank you so much for watching. Sayonara.